introduce our representatives that are senators that are here today. To my immediate left is Senator Randall Hardy, 24th District. And to his left is Representative Diana Dirks, the 71st District. And fashionably late, but on time, Representative J.R. Clays from the 69th District. Sorry, J.R., I couldn't resist.
You went big cop.
Okay, the format of the meetings are we're going to have opening remarks from each legislator, and then there'll be questions from the audience, but please write your questions on the paper provided, and you'll get it to either Eric or LaCrista. She's floating around here somewhere. They'll get the questions up to me, and we'll get those asked to the legislators. And then when we're done with that session, we'll have closing remarks from the legislators. So, Senator, would you like to start?
Thank you, James. Welcome, everyone. Appreciate your attendance, and thanks to AT&T for hosting our event today. I'm happy to be here. Happier to be here than I am in Topeka right now. It's a pretty frustrating place. But before I open up with any other remarks, we do have a representative in our crowd representing the Americans for Prosperity. He's sitting back there with a green shirt on. And he's the one that's responsible for all the big postcards you get in the mail. And I consider the Americans for Prosperity to be the Kansas equivalent of Russians meddling in our local elections. And I don't appreciate it. He lives in Wichita, and he's writing a bunch of questions down, and how you want to deal with those is up to you. But I represent the people in this room, and not Koch Industries. And so it's just a matter of who you would like to represent you in this district, someone that speaks up for the people of Saline County or someone that speaks up for Koch Industries. And so anyway, I'm happy to be here. We have a lot to talk about, but I'm going to let you control the conversation with your questions this morning, and I look forward to having a dialogue with you.
Oh, it's always good to be back home. Trust me. Things have not been the same in Topeka, as probably you've heard over the media. Really been having our hands tied. One time we had to sit from 9 o'clock in the morning till 4:30 in the afternoon. By presence of our leadership, was not really happy with that because I felt that having to raise your hand if you had to go to the bathroom was maybe kindergarten issue, and that I thought was just really ridiculous. And it has really stagnated everything that we've been doing. Committees aren't getting anything out. They want this particular resolution, and it has stymied us doing what we need to be doing, and that's for the people that we serve. And I've made that very vocal. I spoke with the speaker. I said, we really need to get this show on the road. I said, we've already in how many days and weeks into this session, and that we need to really get busy and start taking care of the people back home. So I'm glad that you're here today and answer any questions. I'm sorry that the committees that I've been on, we really haven't been able to get anything accomplished because nothing really gets brought to the floor that I thought of any consequence at this point that's really going to affect us. I'm always looking for something, the positive of everything, and so therefore I'm continuing on and doing the very best that I can, and I hope that you understand that, and so my colleagues are doing the same. They're as frustrated as we are. So thank you for being here, and thank you for those who are all responsible, AT&T, and some sponsors, and hope that you have really good questions for us.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you to the Chamber, our moderator, and AT&T for sponsoring today. Some really great things happening to the State House right now. We passed the Kansas Promise Act just Thursday, and that provides scholarships for Kansas graduates who agree to complete a certificate or 2-year program in one of 10 high-demand areas for skilled trade workers, encouraging folks to go into those areas where we have some vacancies. They donate some time to community service while in school and commit to remain to work in Kansas for 2 years upon completing that certification. We also held hearings on the forward transportation plan in appropriations. That's going to go through our appropriations process. That is essentially an extension of T-Works that completes some of those delayed projects. but then changes the schedule for how projects get moved into the pipeline. Previously, in T-Works, we had to have all of our stuff decided at the beginning of the program. So if you got a project in, great. If you didn't, you're waiting 10 years to get your project done. And even if you did get a project in, who's to say in year 9 that's the same priority you had back in year 1? So this program has more of a rolling entry schedule. Unfortunately, it also comes with a odd little tax increase trigger in it that I think encourages poor budgeting. So we'll try to work on that and see what we can do there. You may have also heard about some executive reorganization orders. These haven't been worked on the floor yet, but we have gone through the process of holding hearings before the deadlines on those. There are 3 major executive reorganization orders. That's when the governor says, I'd like to change the way that my agencies are assembled, what's under each agency, that sort of thing. So she's reorganizing those. There are a couple you've probably heard about, and maybe one you haven't. The one that merges the DCF and KDADS into the Department of Human Services is probably the big one you've seen a lot of information about. But there's also one kind of hidden in there that's a really great idea. In fact, it was an idea that was in the Alvarez and Marcel efficiency study back in 2016, and that brought all of our state employee health plan under the Department of Administration, where all of the other benefit programs for state employees reside. Previously, it was in KDHE. There's a savings of about $165,000 a year by doing that. It also just makes sense that all the employee benefits be in the same place. So I held hearings on that in my committee, and we pushed through a agree resolution, which is kind of the process for how that works, to agree with the governor's idea to do that and to follow that 2016 A&M study recommendation. The other ones didn't fare so well, but that one did make it at least through the first steps in the process, so we assume that that one will happen. And with that, looking forward to all of your questions, and again, thank you to the Chamber and AT&T.
Thank you, everybody, for your opening remarks. One thing I omitted from my opening remarks was Representative Steve Johnson sent his apologies for not being able to be here today. He had extenuating circumstances that prevented him from being here, so he hopes to be with us next time. So anyway, he wanted us to share that, so I've done that. And now the first question that I'm going to shoot across the bow is, please share your position on distributed electric generation. I think that's for any of you. Distributed electric generation.
Well, I'll use this time to say Stephen Johnson's actually at 2 other forums, and they only hold one each year for those 2 communities that he serves. So he skipped this one just this one time because we have 2 more of these. You know, in his defense, not really related to the question because I have no idea what distributed electric generation is.
Is that demand charge?
Yes.
Okay.
Whoever presented that question, we would be happy to answer it if you would just explain to us what it is after he has his chance.
I'll give it a stab. I'm assuming it relates to the demand charge that's included with for people that have solar panels in place, and there's an ongoing discussion at State House about how that process should be treated. Right now, the people that are installing, well, let's put it this way, there are not very many people installing solar panels right now because there is no payback period on those because the demand charge that's associated with their electricity bill prevents that from being a good investment. My thought is that the demand charge is the cost, in my mind anyway, is the cost of being part of the grid, the electrical grid, and it's like paying your dues, membership dues. And I think that everyone that depends on the electrical grid should pay at least make some contribution to the electrical companies for using the grid as a backup when their solar panels are not operating enough to keep the house running or whatever. So my thought is the demand charge, there should be some demand charge associated with owners of solar panels, but not necessarily as high as it is right now, so that people can have an expectation of recouping their cost over a period of 10 to 15 years.
There are many reasons to pass expanded Medicaid. What can we do to encourage the Senate leader to allow the bill for a vote?
I guess that's
You?
me. There's an ongoing battle right now between our majority leader and Senate President over the debate of Medicaid expansion. Our Senate President thinks she's doing the Senate a favor by preventing debate on Medicaid expansion. What she does not know is that there are a number of senators on the floor that really, really want to debate Medicaid expansion on the floor. And we have a couple bills in the Senate Health Committee. She stacked the Senate Health Committee and sent it to a different health committee to be debated or to be heard. And that committee was very in line with her thoughts of Medicaid expansion, which is never let it see the light of day. And so they've taken the bill that the Senate has, SB 252, and they've made a Christmas tree out of it. They've added amendments that would virtually prevent the bill from ever, even if it gets to the floor of passing, because it has things like there's a Texas court case that needs to be resolved before Medicaid expansion can be considered. There's a work requirement that has been voted, or court decisions have nullified that in other states. There's other, what I would consider poison pill amendments that would block it. Now, there's another avenue, though, with Medicaid expansion, and that is the Senate bill that was passed last year is sitting in the Health Committee, and the Plan B for the Senate and the ones that are truly wanting to debate Medicaid expansion would take that bill out of committee, but we need 24 votes to do that. Normally, there are two ways for us to get a bill on the floor. One is for the committee to pass the bill out to committee favorably for passage, or they can, or the body can say, we want that bill in your committee, but it takes 24 votes. And the Senate, 21's a majority, but 24 votes are needed to retrieve a bill that has not been voted out by the committee. And right now, we have 22 votes. And so we have 2 more votes we need in order to get the House bill out of the committee. If we can do that, we're golden. And but that's the plan right now. Is to they've been looking for the last 2 weeks. They've been looking for those 2 votes. They're very difficult votes to come by. And some of I have at least one bill that's being held back and used as leverage to try to get one senator to vote for it. To pull the bill out of committee. So it's something that is tough to do, and I don't know. I was just 95% sure we'd get that bill passed this year, but because of the duel between Senate President and the Majority Leader, I'm not quite sure how we're going to accomplish that right now. Well, there's one other way to get this done, and I'm pretty doggone frustrated right now, and so I'm looking. There's only one thing that my 2 colleagues may not like to hear this, but there's only one thing that the legislature is delegated to do, and that is pass a budget. That's the only bill we have to pass the whole year, the whole session, and I'm looking for some people that are as frustrated as I am in the Senate to say, you know what, maybe we should pass Medicaid expansion before we pass the budget. And so that's what I'm doing right now. But what the implications are, we could be there till June instead of, late April, early May. And at this point, I don't really care. I really think that this state needs Medicaid expansion, and especially the people in this district have expressed and voiced the desire to have it. And I'm firmly in that camp. Over in Abilene Memorial, I don't know what the statistics are on Salina Regional, but Abilene Memorial in 2018 wrote off $700,000 in uncompensated claims because people were not able to pay. And, there's the side of me that says our medical providers, our physicians, the hospitals should be paid something for the work they do. They should not be asked to work for free. And if we had Medicaid expansion, we would have the ability for our medical providers to be paid something for the services that they provide. So those are the options right now, and I'd like to for the House bill to come out of the committee, and then what we would do is what the House did last year, is called a gut and go, which we really don't like to do, but in extreme circumstances we've done that, where we remove the contents of the House bill and put the contents of the clean Senate bill in them, send it over to the House. They cannot amend it. They can just vote yes or no, and that would take care of it. Short of that, I'm not sure exactly how we're going to proceed, but that's where we stand on that one.
Doesn't leave me much to say, because I'm just saying ditto, 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 ditto. Every time somebody has come to visit me at the State House, but the very first question has been, what are you doing about Medicaid expansion? What do we need to do to get everybody off center and get back to work in the way that we should be doing? And it is very frustrating. I know it's frustrating for the Senate members, it's frustrating for the House members, that a few will just continuously drop the ball, say, oh, well, we'll think about it next time, or we'll think about it, or ask for something, we'll give you this if you give us that. I am so proud of the people who showed up here today. I know it's kind of a sparse group, but it's interested people and individuals who want to know what's going on in your state government. And that is what we're there for, is to do the bidding of the people that we serve and what's going to be best for them. As after we've studied every bill that comes out of any committee, we see what are the consequences and what are the benefits. And if there are no benefits, I will not vote for it. If there are consequences, I will not vote for it. Because it's going to, at some point in time, it's going to come down on the back of the people who are sitting in these very seats, listening to us answering these questions. I feel that most of you know that I have always been for Medicaid expansion. Sometimes I've been, applauded, sometimes I've been criticized, but it's what's best for the community. It's just getting off of dead center and having to go through these hoops that the senator just talked about to get anything done. So we are very hopeful that we are not being held hostage once again on that issue, and that we're able to get it passed out of this House and made into a bill. So know that the efforts are there. It's just very frustrating that we're not able to couple them and get everybody on board.
Thank you, Diana. I don't know that there's much I can add either. The House passed Medicaid expansion last year, so that bill is still alive over in the Senate, was sent over to the Senate to find its fate. So I think the House is kind of done with that issue until the Senate does something, and Senator Hardy kind of took care of that. So we'll leave it at that.
Okay, the next question is, what is the status of restricting vaping locations? For anyone?
That's not one of the 4 committees. I'm on 4 committees: Transportation, Utilities, Judiciary, and I'm vice chair of one called Ethics, Elections, and Local Government. And I can tell you all kinds of things about that. vaping has been a topic, and I've heard of several things swirling around the State House concerning that, but I have not seen a bill yet, and there was, talk about raising the age to 21 and restricting the vaping of indoor vaping. To my knowledge, that's come from the AG office. That's what I know so far.
Looks like there's a bill, HB 2563, that bans flavored vapor products, but I don't know if that got a hearing or not. Just hard to tell where that is in the process. Let's
2563.
Yeah, see if 2563's got a hearing on it. Probably Fed and State, maybe, health.
It is the 21st. Committee reporting recommended bill passed as amended by Committee on Fed and State.
Yeah, huh,
So it's out of committee.
amended, yeah, don't know what it does then.
It said increasing the minimum age to purchase or possess cigarettes and tobacco products from 18 to 21, prohibiting cigarette vending machines and flavored vaping products.
Thank you. Next question is, what are your thoughts on Governor Kelly's budget? Do you approve, or are there some changes that you would like to see? Obviously, for any of the three.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Sure. I mean, in principle, the budget, as far as the agencies and the amount of money sent to them, there's not a whole lot of change from the previous year. In fact, there's some decreases due to how strong our economy is on the Department of Labor and things like unemployment insurance being spent. So there are definitely some things that are pretty standard, but there are a couple of things in there like Capers reamortization, which essentially creates the Bank of Capers instead of the Bank of KDOT, only there's still the Bank of KDOT, so there's a pretty sizable sweep that still comes out of there. Trying to think of anything else that's changed dramatically. I mean, in corrections, we're starting to send people to Arizona, so not real super excited about that, but we were able to save about $9.8 million by challenging the governor on that whole process. I don't know, I probably have to think about it a little more about some of the things that are good and bad, but I think overall, just generically speaking, taking out the Capers reamortization, the budget's pretty solid. The judicial branch budget, however, it's a pass-through, so it's not really part of the governor's budget. There are some serious issues that we need to take care of there for the judicial branch and its employees. So we'll probably do that here in the next couple of weeks. But that's not something that's related to the governor or any decision-making she makes, because that's not since it is a third branch of government, she doesn't approve or disapprove of that budget.
I happened to make some copies, not very many of them, of House Bill 2503, which is the Capers amortization. So I won't read it here and go over, but I'll leave a couple back there and you can make some copies. It really gives you the full length of what the bill is all about. It came out of Committee on Financial Institution and Pensions. It was explained to me, it's like reamortizing your house and setting a mortgage, refinancing your house, and then where you're always continuously, it's going to cost us more. So if you'd like to have that, I'd be happy to. It's a copy of the bill brief.
And one note about reamortization and why is it even a subject? It's a subject because we're not quite out of the woods yet as a state. We're sitting on a $1.2 billion ending balance. You know, coming from the City Commission, when we were putting our budgets together, ending balance would be one of the first things we looked at, because we wanted to make sure that we had a rainy day fund for when times get tough or we have unexpected expenses we were not anticipating. Same thing can happen on the state level, and as you could see, back in 2010 through 2016, the ending balance that was fairly healthy at that time evaporated overnight. And our $1.2 billion ending balance right now, if we do not do any more spending than we're doing now and don't get any more revenue than we're getting, which we've done pretty well in that department actually lately. In 3 more years, our $1.2 billion balance will be $92 million. And the statute says that we should have a 7.5% ending balance, and this is about the only year in a decade that we've been able to meet that statutory requirement. And I would like for that to continue. And even if Representative Johnson was here, and I consider him to be our financial guru, he knows that and would probably say that at some point reamortization is probably worth considering, just not now. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to make our payments that are required to take Capers to a point where we are up to date with our payments. And right now we're still trying to get to the point where we are over the hump, so to speak.
Thank you. Here's 2 questions similar in nature regarding plastic bags. Should municipalities be allowed to restrict plastic bags? And if not, how do you justify it with Kansas's home rule? And the other question is, what is the state of Kansas's interest in legislating against community plastic bag bans? Excuse me.
I'm going to start this with the microphone. Once again, coming from a city commission experience, I am a heavy believer in that local government should control whether or not they want to have plastic bags or pit bulls or whatever it is. At the state level, there are very few things that I think that at the state level we can decide that work for all the cities of the state of Kansas. And we're talking about big cities, little cities, whatever. I think that the circumstances vary from city to city. The philosophy varies from city to city. So if Lawrence wants to have a ban and Salina doesn't, fine. If you disagree with the Lawrence ban, go shopping at Topeka. I don't know. I just think that there are way too many times that the state tries to meddle in local affairs, and this is one of those areas.
I'd have to be in complete compliance with that. Not everything that happens in Topeka happens in Salina, and they can do whatever they wish, but back home, we, the people of Salina, should be able to have our own voice first and not always depend on what comes out of Topeka. As you can see what's happening this year, nothing's coming out of Topeka, with some exceptions. But we just haven't seen anything really going strong. And who else knows best about the community than the people who live here? And those are the people that I listen to, and I'm sure my colleagues do as well, what kind of consequence and benefits. And also being kind of having Big Brother looking over your shoulder, oh, well, you can't do that because you're local and you're not state or federal, is ridiculous. So I think I have to be in full agreement.
It is kind of funny how that works. When the bag ban was discussed, I think I tweeted the next day, a bag ban bill was introduced in the House the next day. And sure enough, it was. That was kind of Nostradamus-like. But yeah, that tends to happen when folks get annoyed that a city commission is doing something they don't like. They end up introducing a bill on it, and I guess now there is one. So that happened. I didn't introduce it. I'm just saying I predicted it. So there you go.
Thank you to all 3. What do you propose to help the state agencies fill the 500 plus jobs that are open and to keep them filled?
That's the easiest question you proposed so far, Jane.
Didn't come from me, Senator. It came from the crowd.
But
thank you.
On behalf of the audience. I think that the largest challenge facing the state today is being able to pay competitive wages to all of the agencies that take care of the work of the people of Kansas. And pretty much every agency was gutted during our difficult times. And now we are in the process of backfilling those agencies. And from what I can see, the state is doing the very best it can to help agencies. We've been able to help the Highway Patrol, Representative Clays has mentioned in past discussions, but we need to be able to help our social workers and our court workers and the design people in KDOT. And one of the worst things we can do is be a wonderful training ground for all of these people and that want to learn how to be an engineer. And then after a year or two with KDOT, then some big construction company comes and plucks them away because they can pay 25 or 30% more than the state can, and we can't blame those people for going, but we need to, it's expensive to retrain those people year after year after year. And that, so it is not an effective or efficient way for government to run its agencies, and we just need to keep trying. And even though we know that, it's impossible to backfill those agencies. It may take a decade, is what I'm guessing, before we're able to fully be back in operation again, fulfilling the needs of the state of Kansas.
And just to expand on that, because I think that's all very correct. Usually what happens is the arc of paying people better, and you can see it both in corrections and the Kansas Highway Patrol, is that it creates a demand from more skilled workers. So the quality of applicant goes up significantly when the pay increases. So what happens over time, if you increase pay in these positions, is you actually require fewer people because your quality of applicant goes up and they're capable of doing more things. So I don't know that 500 job openings is really the number that folks should be looking at, but necessarily the ability for each individual to complete the number of tasks that are in front of them, because your quality of applicant goes up. As you start lowering pay, then what happens is what Senator Hardy said, the talented people get plucked off because there's more pay somewhere else. The low-skill worker who is not quite as talented is not plucked off, and then you have to have 2 or 3 of those people to complete the same number of tasks that were being completed by one very talented individual who left. So numbers on state employment tend to fluctuate wildly based upon how well we pay. When we pay better, we should actually have fewer employees than when we're paying worse, when you see the number of employees expand significantly. And it really just depends on what the job description is. I mean, you're only going to have so many people who want to drive around a KDOT snowplow for a living for a long period of time in their life. It's really more of a stair-step career rather than something that someone does for their entire career. So the expectation that someone's going to hold on to that job and that it's not going to be a high turnover position, I think is, I don't think that's going to happen. It's more of an area where you get some experience and you move on. It's like the expectation that someone might work at an entry-level job for the rest of their life, and that's just not how it normally works or should work. So as far as 500 job openings, yeah, there's a lot of job openings, but there's also some room to shave down some of the positions as talented people move into those positions. So corrections is a good example of that. We've increased the number of people, we've increased the pay. We've also done way better when it comes to shift scheduling and the ability to have the right people on the shift at the right time. And then KHP, obviously, another good example of that, where we increased pay and we were able to pull in much higher quality applicants. In fact, the people who are being approved to go through the academy is at a higher rate than previously when you had more applicants, but also more people rejected from the program.
I'm going to, if I may, I'd like to insert something, since I think most of your questions were answered with the answers that were given by my colleagues. I serve on the Children and Seniors Committee, and this last week we had a room full of individuals who have been caught up in the DCF with foster care on kids. And we had children there that had gone through some really excruciating things in their lives. There were some of us that were actually even cheerful. I mean, that they weren't getting clothed properly. They weren't getting enough food. The food wasn't adequate or wasn't really something that was going to be to help grow healthy bodies. And I really truly feel that we need to really take a close look at some of the things, not only the people that are employed in some positions, but also are the positions that they're doing. If you're a foster parent, God bless you, because I know most of them, are really wanting to help a child. And in other cases, they're not. So this is where we need to divide. It's not just a job to get so that you can get paid and go home. You are touching someone's life, not only in their childhood, but as they go into adulthood. They're going to be they will always be permanently scarred in some way that they were not given the adequate opportunities that some of our children have. So I think that's really something in children's and seniors that we're really going to be working on is foster care, having something more of an oversight to make sure that everything is being handled the way it should be. I'm not pointing any fingers at anyone because, I don't know who these people were, but obviously in some instances they were not being cared for properly. And we don't take somebody from a home, put them in more like an institutional oversight and not have that do any better than what they were having at home. So we have to be able to make a difference in their lives. So that might be a little bit off of context on the question, but I thought it would show that there are some things where money is important, but also people's lives are more so.
Thank you. How does Susan Waggle have such power? Why can't she be controlled? For any of you that would like to touch that one.
I don't even want to have that one. When you're president of the Senate, you have the reins. You control pretty much everything. You control all the committee chairs and co-chairs. You control the ebb and flow of the Senate and the activity in the Senate. And the team of president, vice president, and majority leader typically work together in concert to accomplish things in the Senate. Right now, that is not the case. We don't have the leadership working together to accomplish much of anything. And so what we've done is we found workarounds. For instance, and this is an example of a fun little bill for Salina. There's an organization on North Santa Fe. It's called the Love Chloe Foundation. It's an organization that helps with childhood cancer. And the director of Love Chloe talked to me last year, middle of the year, and said, we'd like a specialized license plate for the Love Chloe Foundation. I said, great. Well, we'll get one started in January. And so we went through the process and put the plate together and have the design made up. And I'm on Transportation Committee, so I introduced the bill. And then Heidi from Love Chloe came in and made a presentation to the committee. And in 5 days, that bill went from being heard to being passed by the Senate. And how did that happen? Well, we pulled a little trick, and that trick is called the consent calendar. There are two ways to pass a bill. One is to send a bill out to the floor to be debated and then voted on by the body. The other way you can do this, and this is especially or only with non-controversial bills, is that you can move that they be placed on the consent calendar because they're of a non-controversial nature and they have not been amended. And so we just started putting bills on the consent calendar. So we had 6 bills one day. We had 8 bills another day. And I think leadership finally started saying, they're finding ways to pass bills anyway. And so why don't we just start debating bills? So somehow the leadership decided on Thursday we debated 7 bills. Monday we're debating 5 bills. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday we're on the floor all day debating bills. And we're going to be debating bills those days. I think that leadership has decided our plan of action, in their minds, their plan of action was not working. And so they decided to, you know what, we need to start doing more work for the state of Kansas. And so our little trick to put bills on the consent calendar, I think, sent a message. Long term, and this is if, you know, as you may know, I filed for re-election in November, back in September. And when I was elected back in November of 16, in December, the first week of December, you have leadership elections. And I knew they were probably important, but I didn't know one person from another. And there were enough of us there was enough turnover in the Senate that we kind of did what we were told. And because we didn't know. And we ended up with leadership that I think that if I had it to do over again, may have gone in a different direction. But of the choices we had at the time, I think we made the right choice. Now, if somehow I make it past the November election and we have leadership elections in December again, ooh, my vote is very, very important at that point. And I'm going to, because I'll know all the players. And at that point, we will know, have a much better idea of who should or who should not be in the leadership chairs in the Senate side anyway. And so we'll know a lot more. And as long as we have the numbers. Now, just because you know does not mean you have enough people that think like you do to put those people in the leadership positions. So that's why the 2020 election is so important. We need to have people there that can say, okay, I think our Senate leadership needs to go a different direction. And this is how we can help make that happen.
Thank you. Both of these questions are similar in nature, so I'll read both of them. 1 year ago, we asked legislators if you thought the state should initiate a program to address rapid climate change. All answered, one said no. Have you changed your position? And then this other question is, what must Kansas do to be carbon neutral by 2030?
I don't think my answer's changed. There you go.
Mine hasn't either. In fact, there's probably not so much climate change, but just taking care of Earth. I have an ag. I was really, I'll be real honest with you, I was scratching on something to talk about today. So I went to all my colleagues who are in different committees so that they could at least give me some information as to what's going on there, as to whether or not we're even going to see it on the floor. And one was the pesticides, that they're, and ag is having a movement on pesticides to make sure that these pesticides are not contaminating our soil, which is an environmental, might not be climate change, but at least something is being done, especially those, you know, in certain committees that have boots on the ground out in the country and realize the importance of making sure that pesticides are being taken care of, that's not going to change make any dangers into our environment and the food that we eat. It's just amazing to me, in retrospect, that we have actually, I would say the majority of individuals really do have a mindset that they want to make sure that our Earth, the way it is and has been, will continue to do so for future generations. And so I really applaud the efforts that come about legislatively, people here in our community, you know, to let us know if they have an idea, from one spark of an idea, you'll be amazed at what might be able to come from that, of how to control climate change, get people, and be a voice. If you see something going on that you say, boy, this is going to have some real irreplaceable effect on us, speak out. Right now, that I think is going to be the most important issue, and I do have something here that at this point it doesn't really have anything to do with climate change, but I'll bring it up when everybody has had an opportunity to visit.
There are some things that are happening. on Monday, February the 10th, in the State House, we had something called Wealth Day. Wealth Day is a climate and energy project that promotes conservation of water, energy, air, land, transportation, and health. That's the wealth. And as part of Wealth Day, for the first time in Kansas history, we convened a panel on climate change in the State House. And I was asked to be part of that committee that heard from 8 different presenters, and one of them was the Land Institute from here in Salina, about efforts that we are making and things that we need to continue to do or should do in order to make Kansas more climate friendly. And of course, you know, we're doing some things already. Right now, Kansas is a net exporter of electricity. We are the 5th leading producer of wind generated electricity in the country. 34% of our energy is wind energy. And so there are things that we are doing, but there are things that we need to be doing. Part of one of the reorganization plans that Representative Place was talking about has to do with energy. And part of that reorganization would be the creation of an energy plan, state energy plan. And I think that needs to happen. We can't really get to a point where we're really in a good place unless we know how to get there. And in December, I had the honor of being able to visit Germany. It was a utilities-related trip, and Germany has its own energy plan. And I was thinking then, at that point, I said, well, why doesn't Kansas have an energy plan? Germany is well on its way to living only on renewables. Now, that by 2050, they expect to be out of the nuclear, coal, and gas business. And that's the way they've chosen to go. Kansas is not Germany. But we need to have a plan that says, okay, it would be nice if our energy plan said, well, we want to get to 34% solar by 2020. We didn't really have that, but we did it anyway. So it's just sort of like what we're doing now is happening kind of by chance. I'd rather our decisions be made in a fashion that takes us in a positive direction, gets us to certain goals by a certain period of time. So there are some things that are happening that have not happened in the past, and there's definitely a consciousness of that in Topeka.
Okay, I'll go ahead and jump this one ahead of the others because it piggybacks on the previous question. Representative Clays says his answer on climate change has not changed. What is his position, and can you state it clearly?
Thank you. I was told that all of the questions had to apply to everyone, but we'll go ahead and make an exception. If you'd like to go to the Salina TV website, you can see the past forums that we do, because we do them all the same, and it looks like the crowd is almost identical to every one of those, so I have a feeling the asker already knows the answer.
Maybe someone else could answer.
I wasn't here the last time, and I'd really like to hear the answer.
SalinaTV.com, is that what it is? Yeah, there you go.
Could you please articulate it?
Now, I'm good.
No, I'm not good.
Okay, well, you can't ask questions of one person. We have rules for
Okay,
this. and
someone else
there you
can
go.
answer that question for you. Anyone else?
Okay, we'll move to the next question. Sorry. Why not follow Colorado's lead and legalize marijuana? Anyone?
When I was knocking on my 4,000 doors in the 2016 election, this may be an old story to some of you, there would be an informal poll at the end of my little elevator speech. And that poll was, what do you think about Second Amendment? What do you think about abortion? What do you think about marijuana? And I did kind of a mental checklist of those three topics. And by the end of my 4,000 door poll, I found that more people were interested in medical marijuana than abortion and Second Amendment combined. And so that told me that if I got elected, that was going to be one of my priorities. And I think there is I would guess, a general consensus that medical marijuana should be something to be debated and voted on in the Senate and House chambers. There's a lot of interest in that, and I think that that is probably a way to get our feet wet. I don't know that you want to jump in whole hog with recreational and medical. I think that medical, though, has a distinct purpose in Kansas and would be a worthy cause.
I've had two opportunities to see where medical marijuana would come in. One of my very first visits to my office when I was elected was a family. They had two children. One was being carried in his father's arms, and this child was like 10 years old, but it looked like it was about 3 because of all the seizures. He was just born that way, and they were moving to Colorado in order to get medicinal marijuana for their child. So why should we as a state export our individuals who live here, reside here, and are Kansans have to move to another state in order to get some help for a critically ill child? I'm not advocating that we should all have marijuana. I'm saying this is medicinal marijuana, which works where other medications do not. So I am still a firm believer that we need to have that and make it legal in Kansas to be distributed just as they distribute penicillin, or physicians write a prescription. So it's not going to be any different, but if it's going to help someone who's critically ill from childhood to age, we should look into that. Who are we to say, no, you can't have this because this is the state of Kansas and we won't allow it? You're not going to have people coming into Kansas, you're going to have them exiting just as this couple did.
It makes sense to allow for the medical use of cannabis and other related items. I think we made some progress with things like CBD, but those bills tend to, I don't know if they kind of die an early death or they just don't make it out of committee. But we haven't had any of those that I can recall come to the floor. But usually when they're narrowly written and they're under the supervision of a physician, those are acceptable ways to prevent that from becoming a recreational drug use / gateway type situation, as opposed to something that's truly for a medical reason.
Okay, this is more of a comment, I think, asking for your remarks. Funds for special needs students has been at a low rate since 2008. It says, please increase to 92% so we can care properly for these students. Do you all have any comments on that?
We just keep going down the aisle.
I think that that Kansas should be holding up its end of the bargain, but it's one of those things where you do the best you can, I think, and then you, because there are so many needs in this state that need to be met, that's one of them, and I hate for school districts to have to pick up the tab where we're not meeting our obligations, and it does pain me. I would like to see it as high as possible, but that's not really my area of expertise until the bill hits the floor, though. That's my only shortcoming.
I want to thank each and every one of you who sent up a question or a statement. because this is what it's all about. And by us being able to visit with you, no matter what the numbers are here, you could have a whole room full, but you could still get information for group size as what we have right here. These are the people, you sitting here in these seats are the ones that ask us the questions and can also give us what your thoughts are in some of these pieces of legislation. This is what it's about. If we're sitting there in committee, I said, well, I wonder what my constituents would say. You know, I get on the phone and I call someone who's in that arena to find out, what do you think of this? What consequence will it have? What kind of benefit will it be for the people in Salina and the state? This is what it's all about. And so, not being lengthy, I just feel that by us knocking on those 4,000 doors, I did the same thing, wore out 2 pairs of tennis shoes, is just the fact that that's where we find out, face to face. People in the grocery store will stop me. I was stopped at Walmart the other day, wanted to know have a question answered. I said, I don't have it now, but I got their name and number, and I got back with them after I was able to do a little bit of investigating. So, not just sitting here in this arena right now, but when you're out and you see one of us around, stop and ask us, what do you think of this? I heard about this, or send us a letter. Motion of communication. That's what government is all about. The people, not just the people who sit in those seats and are not getting anywhere because of some leadership. We have the same issue in the House at times, but we just kind of work around it. So I hope that kind of just adds a little bit to your statement.
Can you restate the question?
Have you looked at rewarding state, no, I'm sorry, that's the next one, my bad.
It was the 92%, right?
Funds for special needs students
Yeah.
has been at a low rate since 2008. Please increase to 92% so we can properly care for the students in need.
I think it's statutorily at 92, and it's just a matter of not being funded at that rate. But some of these numbers are kind of arbitrary in the sense that, looking at where our rate is compared to, like, say, Nebraska, I think Nebraska is closer to 50%. But if we're going to have a statute that says to do something at a certain rate, it should probably be at that rate. But as it goes through the process, it's in competition with other dollars and other priorities. There are things like corrections and transportation and capers payments and all of those things that go into the process. But getting as close to that number is certainly the goal as we go through that process.
Okay, have you looked at rewarding state agencies for not spending all of their funds? What are your thoughts?
I'm not sure exactly how you would reward a state agency for not spending all of its funds. Funds are typically justified through the process, so there's not really a whole lot of room for
Can I answer that?
Not
I asked that question.
not spending or spending. It's really
What-
not a crowd participation thing, but I mean, if we're gonna randomly have people shout from the audience, that's, I guess, a new thing. But yeah, the process that we go through has multiple touch points with the legislature approving different funds or disproving different funds. So there are times when agencies don't spend all of their money. I'd mentioned the Department of Labor earlier. There was almost $60 million that wasn't spent, which is fantastic. But that doesn't mean that those funds are now readily available to do something else with. Instead, they have to go through that same process of being attributed to something very specific, especially if they don't come from the state general fund. But going through that process, there are multiple touch points, as I mentioned. So we may get the budget in January, but there's also opportunities for the governor to come back towards the end of that process with adjustments to that budget. And then as time goes on, when we're not in session, there might be changes that are made by the agency, and then when we come back, we'll vote on those changes as well. So it's not something where there's a lot of money just to leave on the table. Typically, agencies are not in a position to achieve massive amounts of savings without there being something legislative done. that actually saves those dollars. Now, there might be vacancies, and sometimes we'll see those vacancies, but agencies are always very good about showing, here's where we had some vacancies, we didn't pay for those positions, so those dollars lapse into the next year's funds. When they lapse into the next year, we tend to reduce that amount so that they can budget along as they normally would. But that process doesn't just leave a whole lot of room for an agency to strike out on its own and just save a whole bunch of money, unless it's just through not filling vacancies on purpose.
We had a member of our audience would like to clarify what that question was. Would we be able to do that?
Sure, if you guys want to allow it, that's fine.
Because right now, most state agencies, it's a use it or lose it. That's the philosophy that the majority of your state agencies have. So my question is, why don't we look at, okay, rewarding them that if you can use your money more wisely during the year, if you're given a $15 million budget, that you don't go and realize, oh, if I don't use this money, the Department of Administration has the right to sweep it back in, they use it. Or they give it back to you the next year, whatever's left over. So why don't we look at rewarding state agencies and departments that if you don't use all of that they become better stewards of their money and just aren't out there just to spend it because they realize that if I don't use it, I'm going to lose it. There's a possibility I could lose it. So if I leave $100,000 on the table, I could lose $100,000 or $50,000 or whatever.
And that's just not how budgeting works. So if they came back for the next year and they had justification for the expenditure of funds, then that's what we would approve. So it isn't that just because you spent $100,000 less this year, you don't get that $100,000 in the next budget. That's not how our budgeting process works. If you don't spend $100,000 the year before, you can still ask for and receive the $100,000 the next year. In fact, we're probably more inclined to give you those funds because there's some reason that those funds weren't spent the prior year. Our budgeting just doesn't work in a way, and besides that, why would the agency want extra cash laying around? I'm not sure how that turns into a reward necessarily for the agency to have more cash when there's not something tied to it. Every line item in our budget has something tied to it. So when we go through that process, it's not like an agency is out there saying, I need an extra 15 million and you guys don't get to know what it is for. It's all for very specific things, and there's so many touch points throughout the year for the legislature to approve or disapprove those expenditures that's just kind of how our budgeting operates. We don't have here's the money agency, come back in a year and we'll see where you're at. Typically when there's any sort of reduction in spending, it's only because of what we call shrinkage, which is basically just unfilled FTEs, unfilled vacant positions for a period of time that creates a sort of a savings, but it's not really a savings because we also bake into our budget a shrinkage rate. So we assume that there's going to be a certain number of vacancies throughout the year, and typically you won't see a huge differentiation between what we predict is the shrinkage rate and the actual. So there aren't a lot of agencies that come back and show this type of savings. You might see, the agency requests this amount. By the way, their 2020 approved by the legislature was $27,000 short, or it's $27,000 less or more, or whatever it is. We're approving those through that process. So agencies aren't just stuck with not getting the dollars they need to do what they need to do, or at least what they've justified through the process.
This is just a comment. Is there anything in the works for recognizing Public Kansas Schools Week, which is February 23rd through the 28th? Is there anything formal for recognizing Kansas Public Schools Week, I believe is what they're commenting about?
Things like that are usually come from the governor's office, in my experience anyway. And there are so many things that are recognized. That should be one of them, be my guess. Just hasn't come out yet.
you support reciprocity for jobs that currently require licensing that will allow new workers from other states to more easily enter the workforce? I'm not sure I said reciprocity right. My apologies.
That's it's a bill floating around the house, I think, maybe, but I think that people that are licensed to work in one state would have reciprocity in Kansas as well. I think that it helps with some of the people at Fort Riley in particular, but I think that if we're not allowing that to happen, then we're not helping ourselves with making our state more hospitable for people to come across the border from Missouri and find work in Kansas.
So it's reciprocity, that's how you say it, Senator? He used to be my neighbor, so he's continuing to educate me even though we don't live next to each other anymore. Okay, the next question is sports wagering in
I've got an answer.
I'm sorry.
It's all right. There is a House bill, it's 2506, and what it does is it allows military members and their spouses to have reciprocity in licensing, everything except for, I think the legal profession is in there, so it's things like cosmetology or, I think I've got a list here, in fact. Oh yeah, accountants, realtors, pharmacists, some other professions are in there, but it doesn't include law. So there is a bill out there, and I think that's kind of moving through the process. It's in Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development, and I think they did that last week, so it will probably end up on the floor sometime next week.
Sports wagering in Kansas, what is your position on this? I mean, it says that it's Senate Bill 283.
So I'm in favor of sports wagering in Kansas. I mean, while we're waiting for everybody to look it up. Certainly, yeah, I think people should be allowed to wager, and that online wagering should be allowed in Kansas.
This is a bill that dips into the other part of my district, which is Dickinson County. Dickinson County, as you may know, has more than 50% of all the greyhound dogs of the United States born and raised there. This particular bill specifically removes greyhound racing as one of the options. And when that bill is debated on the floor of the Senate, I will be offering an amendment to include greyhounds back into the bill so that it can be considered as well as the other sports. And just one little side note on Senate SB 283, it's kind of interesting. We have 150 or 200 bills floating around all at one time, and it's hard to keep up with the numbers. In fact, there was a group that came in, and Zimmerman was part of the group, and I had a bill, and the bill related to rejected provisional ballots, which is a good bill, and it just passed Ethics Elections Committee on Friday, by the way, and so I was happy about that. But they came in and were talking or saying, thanks for your support on SB 351. I said, what is that? That's your bill. And so my bill had just recently received a number, and I didn't even know what that number was. So sometimes people will come in and they're all passionate about SB whatever, and I have to. Sometimes I recognize the numbers, and sometimes if I work quite a bit with the bill, then the number becomes more familiar to me. But a lot of times it's just another number.
Okay. Did you have a comment?
That's fine.
Okay. Do you support further bankrupting the state while leaving the most vulnerable behind by passing Medicaid expansion? If so, what programs are you willing to cut when the federal government pulls their matching funds?
This bill, that as it is constructed, requires no money from the state. It's a 90-10 match. Feds supply 90% of the money. State provides 10% of the money. And the estimated cost of Medicaid expansion is $35 million per year. That amount is, there's a formula that that hospitals are going to contribute that $35 million over the course of the year to make up that difference. In the event that the feds ever decide that they're not wanting to continue the program at the 90-10 match, there is a stopgap built into the bill that would say that all bets are off at that point. Kansas is not required to pick up the difference. But I think that is not very likely to happen because there are 33 states right now that have Medicaid expansion in their states, and guess what? Their 33 states are represented by 66 U.S. senators in the U.S. Capitol. And how many of those 66 senators do you think would vote to remove Medicaid expansion? Probably not a lot of them. So I think that the fact that we're going to, I think we're continuing down the path towards Medicaid expansion, whether it gets passed this year or next year, gives me another reason to run. I think it's important to make healthcare available, accessible to people that no longer have it. The most expensive thing that we're doing right now is we're asking people that do not have health insurance coverage to use emergency rooms as their primary care physician. That is the most inefficient and expensive way to receive medical care in this state. It makes no sense to me. And I think that we need to, if people had a card and they said, and these are people, over half of the people in this expansion group are already working. They just don't make enough money to afford private health insurance or the options that are provided by ACA that would allow them to get discounts on their insurance. I want these people to have the option to at least go to a doctor when they first feel like they're getting sick and instead of waiting until they have pneumonia and they have to be admitted to the hospital. I think that these people should, that they don't qualify for the program, should have the ability to say, you know what, if I'm sick, I'm just going to go to the doctor. Like everybody, I'm going to go to Stat Care to get my stitches instead of the emergency room. It makes all kinds of sense to me. I don't know why there's a big argument about it.
It just seems to me that they keep coming up with more excuses not to pass Medicaid expansion. It's too costly, or it's going to cost us more money, or what all the items that my colleague here just mentioned. They have to quit dragging their feet, get it going, see what happens, but make sure people out in our communities have an opportunity, as was mentioned by my colleague in the Senate. We just quit sitting on it. It's so frustrating that we think, well, we're getting really close this year, we're going to do it. They come up with another, oh, well, it's going to cost this or that. You can't drive across the street without costing something by paying gasoline in your car. Yes, you're going to have expenses, but it's already outlined as expressed. They already have it balanced out that it's not really going to be this horrendous, oh my gosh, we're going to go bankrupt. No, you're not going to go bankrupt. You're going to make sure that you have people being able to get medical care and not have it on and change into something that could be even worse.
While you're looking up my answer on climate change, no, I'm kidding. The copay on this thing is a joke. There is abortion coverage allowed without amending our Constitution. The hospitals are paying 10% just so they could draw down 90%. It's awesome for them. I'm sure that they love that. There are already opportunities for people to get health care coverage. And I can't imagine a world where able-bodied individuals are matched at a 90-10 rate for eternity when we don't even have that rate for the most vulnerable. If you go back to 2016, when we had our budget, we cut out about $200 million in spending and no one noticed because it was all backfilled by Medicaid caseload increases. And those are perpetual and never-ending for able-bodied individuals to compete now with the funding that goes to individuals who are disabled, are young people on CHIP, is just absolutely ridiculous. And I will not be voting in favor of Medicaid expansion. I think expanding Obamacare and having Obamacare is the worst thing that ever happened to this country in the past 20 years. And I would say that it is one of the things that I think morally I object to, and I'm absolutely 100% honest with people when I go knock on doors and ask them for their vote that I'm not going to vote for this, and yet somehow I'm still up here. So I'm thinking I might have the backing of the people who I serve on this one.
As we reorganize DCF, can we agree that privatization is a failed experiment and go back to integrated services?
I don't think we're going to reorganize DCF. Over here, it's ERO number, let's see, ERO number 44 is the Department of Human Services reorg, and that's under HR 6032. Through the ERO process, it only requires one chamber to disapprove, and there's a disapprove resolution already sitting in the House, so I don't think that's going to happen. But I think also just the reasons for that are that in large government bureaucracies, people tend to fall through the cracks. If you look at what most of us deal with, at least I deal with a lot of the time when it comes to constituent concerns, it's because someone is having difficulty with DCF. It's the biggest problem that people have. Combining that agency with another agency isn't going to improve that. It's going to make it worse. You're a number to those people. As government gets bigger, that's how you're treated.
I've already commented on that previously, so I'll let my colleague, who has great answers, to help us out here.
We're bureaucratic. There's no way to get around it. And I think there are probably more efficient ways to do things. DCF is one of those areas because at one point I decided I'm going to pretend like I need to apply for Medicaid. So I called their 800 number. And after 20 minutes, I gave up. I couldn't figure out how to do it. And I have a master's degree in business. And so I think what to me, someone did not put that process through the user-friendly checklist. And so there are things that we can do things better, and I don't know how we're going to do them better, but I do know that some things government just does better because of the nature of the way we do things. Kansas, it's the city of Salina, the City Go bus system is wonderful. And the state, providing, one thing, I had a bill, I have an Eisenhower Foundation bill that I'm trying, this is my third year to try to get that passed. And my first year, it has a fiscal note attached to it. The fiscal note was $56,000. Well, but the bill didn't pass. Well, the next year, I was reintroducing the bill, but the fiscal note changed because we privatized our computer services. And so the new fiscal note for my bill was $660,000. I could not try to defend my bill on the floor anymore because the fiscal note just exploded. And so this year, we took the IT back in-house, and now my new fiscal note is $111,000. And so I'm back onto the floor with my bill. So some things we just, I think government is designed to do. And putting them, you think, well, we'll just privatize all of government. It just doesn't work that way. Too many things happen.
here's one that wants an update on, 3 bills, so we'll try to get through that real quick. Can you give an update on Commerce bills, Star Bonds, HB 2529, HPIP, HB 2702, and Angel Investors Tax Credit, HB 2689?
We'll each take one.
Okay.
How's that sound?
Sounds
I'll do 2529 while you guys look up 2702 and 2689. The 2529 as rural development projects and medical facilities into the Star Bond program. You may notice when you drive downtown that we have the Alley Bowling Center and some other facilities here that are a result of Star Bonds. And what they're attempting to do is to make it so that some of these medical facilities would also qualify for that. It had a hearing on the 17th, and I don't know that it actually has moved anywhere, but it also extends the sunset date on Star Bonds, so they kind of tied all of that in there, because these programs require a lot of evaluation, especially the ones that require the approval of the secretary. And there's a lot of subjective judgment going on there with the secretary that might be there at the time, whether or not something meets the requirements of the statute on the Star Bond project. And we've had a couple of failures because of that. And 2 of the failures are actually because the secretary didn't approve them and the legislature instead decided to pass a law authorizing them, so not wise to go around what the requirements are for these Star Bond projects, because they can be extremely successful. You'll probably see a lot of success out of ours. There's obviously the success out of the one up by the Speedway, which brought the Kansas Speedway to the state of Kansas. But yeah, there are certainly some changes that appear to be coming in the Star Bond statute, or that it will potentially sunset.
One of them, which one was that, 25? We've already covered, that was on cannabis, we've already covered that. And what was-
It never left committee.
2702 and 2689.
That 2702 is decoupling the KIT and KIR workforce training programs from a high performance incentive and fund program and enhancing the workforce training tax credit. That's a House bill that I know nothing about. It was, I do know on Wednesday there was a hearing for it, and that's all we know so far.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're gonna close it up. We didn't get to all the questions. I apologize for that as your moderator. That's probably my fault. But we're gonna allow each legislator for a few closing remarks before we close for the day.
Okay, and thank you, James, and thanks for the work you did today, and thanks everyone for coming again. I appreciate your participation and your interest. I'm just going to throw out a couple bills that I've been working on in ethics, elections, and local government. I talked about this one bill that just passed our committee, and in the 2018 election, we had 7,000 rejected provisional ballots. Over half of those rejected provisional ballots were people that had a wrong address. And so that means that someone moved from Abilene to Salina, and they go to the poll to vote and find out that their address is not listed in the poll book. And they say, oh darn, I forgot to register. Well, here, fill out this form, register to vote with your new address. We'll attach it to your provisional ballot. When those ballots are taken back to the election office, then the information is caught up in the computer, so the person is now correctly entered into the poll book, and their provisional ballot is rejected. And so my bill would, because it was within that 21-day window where you're not allowed to register to vote and to vote. So my bill would say that if that is the only defect with your ability to vote, then you'd fill out your new information, and it would be attached to your provisional ballot, and when the ballot would get back to the elections office, it would still be considered to be counted. And so that's one bill that we have. There's another bill that we heard the other day. It would allow for people to apply for a permanent advance ballot. So if you filled an application and you wanted an advance ballot, you could get it. It would be sent to you automatically every election. Right as it is written right now, if you missed 2 consecutive elections, then your name would be removed. You could go back in and fill out another application. But as long as you're voting, and chances are when you're getting that ballot in the mail, you're going to send it back. What Gary County found out they had a mail-in ballot election is that participation increased 3 times when they had a mail-in ballot, advance ballot, as opposed to just going to the polls. And in my mind, having elections as easy as possible is good for the state of Kansas. Thank you very much.
Once again, thank you all for being here. Sorry my voice is leaving me. It happened to me this week as well. One bill that I'd like to mention that was presented by Representative Highland, and my office mate was really put out by it, and this is the meatless hamburger. It says there are so many things that tie up with that. It's House Bill 2437, and it deals with stating that this is a meatly on your artificial hamburgers. Now, as I don't know the whole thing, he just told me about this when I was leaving the office yesterday, and but it really brings up some things about what all is in the meatless hamburger or meat. Of course, he's a cattleman, so he's a little upset about meat and meatless. But the labeling thereof, advertisement means all representatives, representations should be, what kind of drugs are they putting in there? Food additives means any substance intended use of results, reasonably expected to result or indirectly become a component. So what are those additives that they're putting in there? So they really are really upset about the advertisement of meatless is just as well as meat, and it tastes like hamburger. They've added color additives, grocery stores, bakeries, locations where food is provided, food processing plant, what's going into that processing. And then on the bottom, especially the label is the thing that he was really concerned about, was you're calling it meat. You're referring to meat and it's not meat. So what is it? So that would be something, and I could get some additional information for you. It was kind of a last minute thing that he wanted me to bring up to this audience, was concerning agriculture to labeling of certain foods and prohibiting the use of identifiable meat terms or meat analogs without use of proper qualifying language to know exactly what it is that you're eating. So I thought that was an interesting bill, and I'll be following that to see what happens. But thanks again to everyone, the sponsors of this forum today, and I hope that we came up with some adequate, again, not having as much to deal with this year, it was kind of difficult to come up with some ideas of what I was really even going to say, because some of the committees that I'm on, I'm not on appropriations or tax, so I have to leave that to my colleagues. But if you do have an idea or want some additional information and was not had any answers today or a question asked, please feel free to contact either one of us, and we'd be happy to get some answers for you. And thank you again for the invitation to be here today.
Looks like our time's up. No, I'm kidding. I think it would probably be helpful to mention that I do serve on appropriations, the Transportation Committee. I chair General Government Budget, and then I am the vice chair of the Joint State Building Construction Committee. And I point that out because a lot of what I do during the day doesn't involve bills. I handle mostly budgets during my day, except for some transportation bills. So most of what I address is budget related, and there are a lot of things happening through the budget that I think are important. And if you have questions on those, I'm more than happy to answer those. Apologies if some of the bill questions didn't get answered, because some of them are just not things that most of us might see during the day. Usually when we have Stephen here, he's got tax and some other things too that he deals with during the day, so we kind of round out most of what the what's going on in the Capitol. But today there were certainly some bills that folks wanted to talk about that we didn't have all the stuff on, so apologies for that. I do want to say happy Kansas Public Schools Week, and thank you to the Chamber, the AT&T, and of course our moderator today for moderating this event. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Our next legislative issues meeting will be held on March the 14th, Saturday, same place, same time. Thank you to our legislators for being here today. We appreciate your time. We're just sorry that Representative Johnson could not be with us. And we want to thank you, the public, for being here as well. And we're sorry we didn't get to all your questions, but in the future, I would imagine every time I've ever emailed my legislator, they've emailed me back. So if you still want your question answered, I would encourage you to reach out to them via the email or some other form of communication. Hopefully they can get back to you on those. And last but not least, I want to thank Lane Rottinger, however you say it. I'm going to get it, Lane. I apologize for sponsoring the meeting. And thanks to Eric, our CEO, and LaCrista, she's our MVP on special teams for the donuts and coffee. And we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.